We start by applying a thin coat of black primer to our model. This black base will be the foundation for the shadows of our mini. Next, we apply a zenithal highlight of white primer, simulating a light source shining directly from above our mini. Spray from directly above and at a 45-degree angle to the model. This technique defines the volumes of the model for us. Once we have defined the volumes of the model, we can see exactly where we should add more white to simulate where more light would naturally hit the mini. This can take a little practice. We want to create smooth highlights to shadow transitions with our airbrush. Don't worry if you make a mistake and lighten an area too much. We will fix any of these problems in the next step. Next, we're going to fix any mistakes we've made in our highlighting step. We do this by using a transparent black ink to darken areas we may have over-lightened in the last step, or to darken areas we just think should be in more shadow. Once again, use your airbrush to make these transitions. Dial your paint flow down for this step to better control exactly where you want the shadows to go. As with anything, practice makes perfect. So don't worry if you accidentally darken an area too much. You can always go back and relighten an area with white primer again if needed. Now that we have completely highlighted and shaded the model, we're going to add some color. But instead of using a more opaque layer of paint like we usually do, we're going to glaze or tint our model with a transparent, highly pigmented, very thin mixture. In this case, I will be using Games Workshop's Talisar Blue contrast paint for this step, thinned down 50% with an airbrush thinner. Slowly apply this layer evenly across the model. Applying too much paint to a highlighted area can darken those highlights too much, ruining the highlight to shadow transitions we've created earlier. So be very careful during this step, building up the color very slowly. To really make our librarian's blue armor stand out, we're going to edge highlight all of the raised edges of the model with Temple Guard Blue. Edge highlighting can be a challenge, so here are a few tips. First, use a small brush with a very fine tip. Next, make sure you've thinned your paints down well. This will allow the paint to flow more freely from your brush. You may have to experiment with how much you thin the paint down to get it to flow properly. Also make sure your brush isn't overloaded with paint. Too much paint on your brush can cause it to flood onto your model. Finally, make sure you firmly brace your arms on your chair or painting table, holding them closely tight against your body. And brace your hands and fingers against the model, its holder, and your hands against themselves. This will help to steady your brush and help you achieve thin, straight lines. a librarian is highlighted, we can wash the recesses of the model, further emphasizing its deepest shadows. I like using oil washes over acrylic washes for this step. Capillary action wicks the wash into the recessed areas of the model, something acrylic washes don't do. This saves us time and effort. Also, oil washes easily clean up if you get them onto unwanted portions of the Mini, unlike acrylic washes, which once dry are almost impossible to remove. To remove any wash we got on unwanted areas, we simply dip a Q-tip into a little bit of mineral spirits and gently wipe the excess wash off of our model. Mineral spirits are required for this step as simple water won't remove dried oil washes. Don't worry about removing the wash that you want in the recesses. The Q-tip will only remove the dried wash on the raised surfaces of the model, leaving the wash in the recesses behind, exactly where we want them. We now move on to the librarian's robes. We start by laying down a base layer of XV88 to help create shadows for the robes. As you can see, we use silly putty to mask off areas of our model so we don't get overspray on them. Next, we paint the main color of the robes using the color ivory. Spray across the folds of the robe so that some of the XV88 below remains, creating a shadow inside the folds of the robes. You can see really well here how this technique works, applying our main color while leaving some natural shadows in the recesses where the paint can't reach it. To emphasize the shadows of the robes by using a 50-50 mix of Seraphim Sepia wash with water. Apply the wash to the recesses of the robe slowly, building up a transition between the XV88 below in the shadows and the ivory in the highlights above. Using the thinned down mix of the wash here allows us to slowly build up the transition from the XV88 to the ivory. Using a full strength wash here could have made this step much more difficult. It's always easier to slowly build up a transition than it is to try to do it heavily all at once. finish the robes, we create a final edge highlight on the very extreme outside edges of the folds of the robe with the color white. Use the same techniques that we used earlier for the edge highlighting on the armor for this step. Next, move on to the shoulder armor of the model. We begin by applying a layer of Wazdaka red to them. Again, we've used Silly Putty to mask our model off. I've also removed the jump pack to make painting these areas much easier. We now highlight the upper areas of the shoulder armor using Evil Sunz Scarlet. Use your airbrush to create a smooth color transition from the darker Wazdaka red beneath. Emphasize the upper portions of the shoulder armor by applying more Evil Sunz Scarlet to the tops of them to make them brighter. Next, we now move on to the gold parts of the model. We use Retributor armor for this step. Take your time here, as there are many small details that need to be painted. We now want to emphasize the recesses of the gold areas by washing them with Reichland Flesh Shade. On areas like the brocade on the robes, you can allow a little of the wash to slightly overflow the outer edges of the pattern. This helps to emphasize the brocade for us and makes it stand out from the ivory of the robes. If you would like, after completing this wash step, you can further enhance the highlights of the gold parts by gently dry brushing a brighter gold color on them. But this step is optional. It just depends on how much time you want to spend on your model. Next are the silver details. We use Runefang steel for this step. Once again, being careful to apply the paint on the smaller details of the model. This process is also applied to the jump pack that we removed earlier. To emphasize the silver recesses, we're going to wash it with non-oil. Again, a dry brush of a brighter silver can be used to emphasize the raised edges of the silver parts if you would like. But once again, this additional step is left up to you. Next, we are going to paint the winged icon on the librarian's shoulder pad. We do this by coating the wings with Stonewall Gray. Use several thin coats to achieve complete coverage. We now again apply a wash of non-oil to emphasize the recesses. The leather parts are next. First, we lay down a layer of leather brown on all these areas. This is followed with a wash of Agrax Earthshade. Again, we can take things a step further by adding an edge highlight of a lighter brown color to emphasize the edges and make them stand out. Next, we move on to the parchment and purity seals. After all of the parts have been coated with ivory, we now wash them down with a thin mixture of seraphim sepia and water. You can go back and emphasize the edges of the parchment by edge highlighting them with white if you wish. Finally, we apply squid pink to the wax seals of the purity seals, and then give them a good wash with Kohlberg crimson. To complete our model, we're going to be creating a glow effect on the engine ports of the jump pack. We do this by dialing the paint flow of our airbrush way down so that we can accurately apply white primer to the inside of the engine ports without getting it on the rest of the jump pack. We now apply a wash of athematic blue to the recesses of the engine ports. For our final step, we go back in with white and use a standard brush to edge highlight all of the sharp edges of the insides of the engine port itself and also the very outside of the engine port. Our Blood Angels Jump Librarian is now completed, and here are the final results. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it informative. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to ask. Don't forget to smash that like button and hit subscribe. We will be posting many more painting tutorials in the very near future.